Welcome to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Sarah McDuling, and I'm pretty much beside myself at the moment. So excited to be talking to Lynette Noni.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Lynette, welcome back to the podcast. You're here today to talk to us about your upcoming book, The Prison Healer. Before I launch into my extreme love for this book and a million questions, would you care to just outline for the people listening what the book is about?
Okay, so The Prison Healer is about a 17-year-old girl called Kiva who has been locked for the last 10 years in a death prison called Zalandov. Now, most people die within a few months, sometimes weeks, sometimes even days of arriving, but Kiva's managed to survive for that decade by working as the prison healer, but also by keeping her head down and just keeping her wits, and spying on the other prisoners for the warden. So then one day, a rebel queen of one of the nations in this world is captured, and she's sent to Zalandov prison, and Kiva is tasked with keeping her alive long enough for her the queen to undertake this thing called the trial by ordeal, which is 4 elemental tasks sentenced only to the very worst of people. But the queen has arrived very, very sick, and so Kiva knows that she's not going to last long enough to actually meet the trials. But on top of that, Kiva also receives a note from the outside world, from her family. It's all in code, and it says, "Don't let her die, we are coming." So suddenly Kiva's stuck between this rock and a hard place where she has to keep someone who is dying alive in order that she might survive something that is unsurvivable. And so Kiva kind of volunteers in her place to do the trials, knowing that she won't make it through them, but also that she just needs to stall long enough for some kind of rescue to come. So that's kind of the premise of The Prison Healer. There is a lovable young assistant who is just a little ray of sunshine. There is a surly but companionable and protective guard. There is a charming love interest. There is a plague that's going around the prison. There's all kinds of different elements all thrown into this book to make it one hopefully epic read.
Oh, hearing you go over it again just takes me right back. This was a wild reading experience for me. I just got so deeply sucked in. It was a stay up till you finish reading type experience. And it always blows me away when authors this is the part where I'm just going to heap some praise on you. So
don't make me blush.
So that will probably be a running theme of this podcast. But you're an internationally best-selling, multi-award-winning author with this massive, deeply devoted fan base. So, pretty much by any standards which you judge these things, you're an author at the top of your game. And speaking as someone who's read all your previous books and loves all your previous books, this book totally surprised me and blew me away. And I feel like, you gain certain expectations going in when you like an author and you've read their previous work. And this one totally blew my mind. It's a little darker and scarier than I expected. It's still everything that you want from a Lynette Noni book, but it sort of felt like it was to the power of 10.
Yay!
The scope of the storytelling here I guess my question is, I'm working up to it, is would you agree that this is kind of like a somewhat of a new direction for you?
I think it's a natural progression for me. The later books in my Medoran Chronicles certainly got a little bit more intense and a little bit darker. They were still very, happy fantasy, but there were moments of torture and a lot of death and a lot of action and fantasy violence. And so I think, and my Whisper series, there's the psychological thrillerness of that one, and it's got some really not so pleasant medical kind of procedure kind of unpleasant kind of things. I don't even know how to talk about that one. But The Prison Healer it is set in a death prison. So I did a lot of research on concentration camps and some of the most horrific prisons in the world and the way prisoners have been treated throughout history. And I visited a lot of prisons and so, there was a deep dive into that. I did, obviously as a young adult author, I tried to keep it as young adult friendly as possible, aware that, I have a young readership and I want this to be appropriate for them and not scarring in any way. But there are certainly triggers in this book. And, I had to try and make it as real as possible. If you think about a setting of a death prison, people aren't going to be happy there. There's going to be mentions of violence and abuse and the guards taking advantage of people and people, you know, and this world that this prison is in, you know, they're not getting enough food, it's too cold, everything about it. People are sent to this place to die. It is the ultimate destination for someone who, to the eyes of the world, has done something wrong, whether it's, you know, steal a piece of bread, if we go back to, you know, back to our earlier days, or whether it's something like committing treason against the crown. So despite the severity of the crime, they all go to this one place until they die, and they labor there. And so there are people who work in the quarry, there are people who dig tunnels beneath the prison, there are people who are in the lumberyard, there are, you know, most of the roles of this place are intended to break a person's spirit. And so all of that does set up a pretty dark world. But what I hope that readers will get from this is that even in the darkest of times, you can still find the light. And so there is so much about this book that is about hope and about building friendships and choosing your own kind of family in the most horrific of places and surviving things that should be unsurvivable and just I guess keep fighting. The whole point of the Prison Healer is about survival. And so while I hope that people will just, you know, sit back and read and enjoy the book, I would really love it if in some way it was imprinted on people that even in a fictional setting, if someone can go through something like this and keep fighting, then whatever I'm going through in my own life, I can fight for another day as well. So I guess, yes, there are a lot of darker themes, but my hope is that people will see the light in it as well.
I think that you 100% achieve that, and that really this background of Zalandov and the hardship that Kiva goes through, because you really do put her through the ringer. But all of that is just sort of prime storytelling ground for heroism and like compassion and, you know, the best of humanity to come shining through. And it's what makes this such a intense and unputdownable read, because I mean, you know, you are in some life-threatening situations, like for a large portion of this book, when Kiva's not trying to survive the trials, she's just trying to survive Zalandov, which is hard enough. I guess I think because you do, you know, I want to do stress for people listening. First and foremost, this is an adventurous story with a like heart-pounding romance, and it's not as dark as it may sound when we discuss these things. These are just part of the story. But I did want to ask, when you're an author who's writing about potentially triggering subjects, and you do touch on some in the story here, I think with great sensitivity and care. But I imagine it's challenging for you, right? And when I was reading it, I was thinking, I'm wondering whether it's harder or in what ways is writing this in a fantasy setting more challenging. You know, I know you haven't perhaps attempted to do it in a contemporary setting, but I just thought you could speak to that as a fantasy author writing about topics, you know, that people may deal with in real life. Definitely.
So I guess the first thing is I have to be very careful, and you know, I have in one way or another, I have a responsibility to protect my readers, especially those who are younger, and you know, and to be aware of what content I am feeding them and how I do it. But on the other end of the scale, these are very real things that happen in real life, and there is such an overlying theme of mental health in this book, which I guess you would assume would happen in a place like a death prison. There are going to be a lot of those elements. And, you know, this world that we live in, it is dark, if we're being honest. It is dark. People go through horrible things, and it seems to be happening more and more and more, especially with social media being what it is. And yes, okay, we might not be facing imminent torture or death from guards in a prison. Some people might be, but for the most part, we aren't. But we have our own battles, and we have our own darkness that we are fighting. And so I felt like I had a duty, in a sense, to represent that in the most careful but realistic way that I could. Because, you know, so one example is, and it is not a main central part of the plot, so I'm not really giving anything away, but at one point you find out that one of the main characters, at some point in her past, she she had enough mental health problems and enough guilt of stuff that she was doing that she self-harmed, and so she had found the way and the tools to move on from that. And so we learn about it in this is something I've gone through, I'm now through it, but I've had to deal with it, and it's hard, and I'm these kind of things. And so because of that, that's because more and more I'm hearing of like my own life, my own friends, people in my own world who have these hidden parts of their life that they're like maybe even secretly ashamed of, and that's so dangerous, because that's when in real life people, if you hide a struggle that you are going through, it's just going to become like an infection beneath the skin, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And so the best thing you can do is talk about it in a safe space to someone who you are protected by, and who will be there for you and hold your hand through that until you get through it. And so I guess I wanted to, in the safest way I could, I wanted to bring awareness to some things, whether they are fantasy or not, so that people might feel encouraged and emboldened to realize that, okay, maybe I should talk to someone about what I'm going through. If this character who I love and relate to can have the courage and the strength to do it, to talk to someone or to get past this, then I'm not so alone in the world, and maybe I can do that too. And so it's a very scary line that I have to straddle, because I'm, at the end of the day, I want to just write a nice entertaining book, but I would also love for people to know that they're not alone, and that this is a big scary world, but we can, when we have people around us, we can kind of wade through it together. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I want to just really reiterate that I think you did it with care. It was really well handled and really well done. And while perhaps if you're recommending the book, trigger warnings might help, I think that anyone who maybe has those triggers would feel safe in your hands here.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah, and so now that we've talked about all the really heavy stuff, I'd like to talk about the romance. Do you know that quote from the movie Speed about relationships that start in extreme circumstances?
Yes, I do. I love that quote.
That is what. So I love relationships that start in extreme circumstances. If you're going to talk about romance tropes, there's nothing I love more than two people who are fighting for survival, finding time in between life-threatening situations to really fall in love. And so I guess, I don't know, I don't want to be too spoilery, but what are the challenges of writing romance when you've got so much action and so many life-threatening things going on standing in the way of those cute moments?
Oh man, I mean, it's a balancing act, that's for sure. I think because I am naturally pretty against insta love, that any book I ever write, I will always be in it for the long game. So I will know from the very beginning that the setup has to be good, and even if there's instant attraction, instant attraction I think is important. And then there's that tension builds between them, because that they're kind of fighting things even if they don't want to. And so I have a lot of experience with this in my Medoran Chronicles series, which is a 5-book series with a set of novellas. It takes the entire 5 books before the main characters actually come together, and you're waiting for it the entire time along, and they have these beautiful, cute moments that you're just rooting for them, and you're just like, come on. And so and I just feel like the payoff for something like that, if you can be patient, some of my favorite books I've ever read, it's, you are just waiting to get to that moment where it's just like a yay, and so so that's kind of with the Prison Healer. Again, with the setting, it really helped, I guess, to slow that relationship down, in the sense that Kiva, who has been in this horrible situation for 10 years, she doesn't trust anyone. She's got very few people in her world who she'll let in, even the closest people to her, which is that young boy I mentioned before, and this kind of grumpy old morgue worker, who is just this, who's just, I don't know, you just imagine this lovable old man who is just kind of wants to pat her on the head kind of thing. Anyway, she's known them for long enough that they're her closest people, but she won't let herself care about them, because in a place like Zalandov, she just knows that everyone's going to die, and to form a relationship, it's just going to cause her problems. So when the love interest comes into it, and especially when he is designated work in one of the hardest labor parts of the prison, she's like, well, he's going to be dead in the month, so that's that. And so it helped because of her emotional, I guess, her emotional abandonment to everyone and around her. It helped to kind of keep that distance there from her perspective, especially because the novel is set from her perspective. And so she has very valid reasons for keeping people at arm's length, and that helped with that. But he had other plans. He was a little bit too persistent and wants to break through the walls that she's put up. And so, the entire novel and beyond is him doing everything he can to convince her otherwise.
And beyond. How tantalizing. Well, I'm going to stray into the potentially mildly, I'll be really careful, say if I've said something wrong, spoiler land. So, how do I phrase this? There's a lot of, you pull off something pretty extraordinary in this book, I feel, in terms of delicate plot work. And I love when authors do a thing, and you do a thing in this that I really like. It's and I feel like it must have been really hard. So when you've got twists in store for the reader, I won't say how many, and your main character has, perhaps some surprises up her sleeve, but you're writing in close third. Like, are you able to, in a spoiler-free way, talk about the challenges of weaving through, like telling a fast-paced story that never quits? Like, there's never a moment here where the things aren't going on, and you've got so many balls up in the air.
Yes, so I had a lot of fun with this because I knew what that thing I think you're alluding to is from the very beginning, and I knew that was how that events would be leading to that. And so, which really helped because it meant that I could thread in those hints all the way along, but in a way that the beauty of The Prison Healer is that, my hope is, the first time you read through it, you'll have no idea about some of these twists, but when you go back in a second read, you'll be like smacking your forehead because you're like, it is so obvious. It is right there, like one line or one word or one little hint here or there. And the thing is, I've hopefully done it in a way that in the initial read, you read into it in the wrong way. So I've done a lot of distraction, and there are other plot arcs with this book that do kind of take your eye elsewhere when I don't want you to be focused on what I'm setting up to reveal. And so, and I think, and also there is one twist that I personally feel is so obvious, and I've tried to write it so that it would be obvious, so that people would be focused on that twist and not the others. And so, because, as a reader, you're always looking for twists, and you're like, you know what, there's going to be one, I think it's this one, I think it's this one. And so I wanted to make one that was hidden-ish, but, a savvy reader would be like clued in about this is being set up. And so, because as a reader, you kind of get a bit of satisfaction when you're like, I was right, I knew it all the way along. And so I really tried to have an obvious twist in order to distract from the less obvious twists. So there was a few different things that I did to try and cover up, the other things that would come along. But again, in a reread, once you know all the facts, it is all right there in front of you. So yeah,
I'm looking forward to the reread, actually, but the experience of reading it for the first time for me, I can't tell you how many. I do a lot of crime reading and reviewing of crime novels, so the execution of plot twists is something I read it a lot, right? So the experience I had when reading a book is exactly what you just described. You're a magician. You had me so distracted over here that I did not see all this other stuff coming, and I was completely sideswiped. It was great. I loved it.
Yay.
And
awesome.
It's something that, I haven't been that genuinely beautifully taken by surprise in a book for quite a while. So, I mean, hats off. I loved it.
Thank you. That is high praise coming from you, so I very much appreciate it.
But the end is so hard to get to because you're there. You've just had some knowledge dropped on you, and then peace out. and all of the readers are just like left there like, wow, okay, what? But the wonderful thing is that I have noticed the release date of book 2 is closer than I would have expected. Are we allowed to talk about book 2? It's
Yes,
out.
for
It's
sure.
announced,
Yes.
right?
Yes, it has been announced. So the book 2 is called The Gilded Cage. And it comes out just 6 months after book 1. So book 1 is coming out in Australia on March 30th. Book 2 is coming out in October. So you don't have to wait that long to find out what happens next, which I'm sure readers will appreciate.
Oh my gosh, they're going to appreciate that so much. I appreciate that so much. And what's the reason for, is that just you being really kind and knowing that you're going to leave people hanging and so you won't make us wait that long, or just is it because of how quickly you write, or how come we get to have book 2 so quickly?
It was a combination of events. I think when I signed on with my international publishers, they pitched the idea and they said, we'd really love the idea of, making the biggest splashes possible with this series as we can. And that helps if we can roll straight in, like from the marketing of one book straight into the marketing of another book. Because normally young adult books come out yearly, right? And so you have the initial big burst of whatever. But by the time the year is up, people have kind of forgotten about it, and you kind of have to start all over again to remake people aware of things. And so in Australia, this wouldn't be so much of a thing for me because I'm established over here, and I have a really beautiful, dedicated fan base. But since we're doing this, is kind of it's my first book that's coming out in the UK, and it's my first, that's kind of my biggest US release. And so we just wanted to capitalize on that in any way that we could. And because I do write quite quickly, I was, I didn't commit at first. I was like, well, let's just see how we go. But I got the book done in time for us to have it edited, and I've just finished my final read through of it. So it's all, from my end, it's all done, and it's just going through the final little proofreading tweaks, and then it'll be off to getting advanced copies done and all of that. So and then off to the printer, and I know it's terrifying. And so yeah, I'm really excited because 2020, last year, the year that in the future no one will ever talk about. Actually, probably everyone will talk about, and just sort of sign up saying let's not talk about this. But it was the first year since I was published that I didn't have a book scheduled to release, and that was purely by coincidence. I got all the contract offers and everything for The Prison Healer at the end of 2019 before COVID hit, and everyone was like, you know what, let's leave 2020 out of it and jump straight in strong in 2021. And that was really fortunate in hindsight because none of us knew what was going to happen, and it meant that I could write and edit and everything without having to worry about releasing a book in the middle of a pandemic. So I really feel for every single author who has had to navigate that in the last year. It's been, I think I've tangented a bit, but the answer to your question is it was planned from the beginning that we would try for 6 months between releases. And the more people who are reading early copies of The Prison Healer, the more I'm realizing that I'm really relieved that we are managing to bring out book 2 so quickly, because otherwise I'm just going to be fielding, why do I not have the next book ready? So at least this way I can say, you don't have to wait long, it's coming soon.
It really is a blessing. And anyone who's listening to this podcast and about to read Prison Healer, when you get to the end, I feel and sympathise with what you're going through, and B, keep in mind more is coming before the end of this year. I think it's an important thing for people to know when they get to that ending.
That's true. And also bit of advice, and don't jump to the end because you'll ruin the entire story for yourself if you do.
I agree with that. And, I've gone on and on at length in many, many of these podcasts about how I don't care about spoilers, and that if the book is really good, it can withstand you knowing what happens in the end. I think that's true here, but also the joy of being surprised when it's done well is worth it's worth not spoiling yourself for this one if you can. And I say that as someone who's very low key about spoilers. Like I normally don't care. I'm like, tell me the end. That'll convince me whether to read it or not. So like,
And well, and I come across it from the point of I have worked so hard to set this up in the most subtle way possible. So do yourself a favor and do me a favor and enjoy the process.
I really think readers would do themselves a favor to just like hand themselves over to Lynette Noni and enjoy this book, because you've done a thing and you've done it expertly. I really like.
Thank you.
I love how well it all has come together. It's an amazing reading experience, and you are like the perfect example of what you've done in this book. Is what I so often say, which is that sometimes plot twists don't land because it's as though the author has tried to be as unexpected as possible, right? Like, I just want something so out of left field that no one's ever going to possibly guess this. And that's never the best plot twist. The plot twist is always the thing where it's like the end of The Sixth Sense. The moment it happens, you realize, of course, on some level I knew this, but I was too distracted or too wrapped up in the story to see it at the time. And that's how I felt reading this book, 100%. You're like, of course, like part of me should have known this, but you can't. There's no time to figure out the ending, and people shouldn't even try. Just enjoy this ride.
I think you mentioned before that you read a lot of crime novels. I think because I don't read a lot of crime novels, but I watch a lot of crime shows. And I think it's exactly what you said. It's so obvious who the bad guy is that, you know, you want something that's a little bit more thought out and a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more like, you know, I'm in the bad crime shows. The good ones are like, whoa, who is it? I can't figure it out. But then the other end of the scale is if it's too much of a curveball, you're like, well, they could have, you know, I don't have any emotional, you know, attachment to this character because it's someone new who I haven't met yet. So I tried to find a balance between that would keep it, you know, keep people on their toes and keep things clever, but at the same time, you know, not be too obvious, but also not be too curveball, like too left field.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to have, oh, the murderer was cousin Robert, who you've never met before. Here he is.
Yeah,
like,
surprise!
Nothing completely like unknowable to the reader, but just so well. There's just, the pace of this book does not allow the part of your brain that tries to figure out twists to work. It's too wrapped up being worried for the lives of all the characters. Like, you're too busy. A person can't be that worried for the fate of a character and thinking ahead and trying to guess what's coming next. You can't do both those things. And so I think that's why it works so well, because there is rarely a moment in Prison Healer where your heart's not in your throat, worried for somebody's fate. Usually Keevan's.
Oh, good.
So I guess we're kind of running a little bit short on time. You've already spoken a bit about what's up next for you. We've got book 2 coming in October. Are you able to speak beyond that? Do you know will it be another 6 months book 3, or is that all like you can't talk about that yet?
We're still deciding. I mean, the hope is that it'll be 6 months, but it's dependent on a lot of things. I have a lot of obligations in the lead up to the Prison Healer, and just because I've just finished the second book, I now have to begin drafting the third book, and the second book veered into territory I was not entirely expecting, and I love everything about it, but it does mean that my plans for the third book are a little bit off kilter now, and so I have to figure out how to work. I cannot describe how excited I am to draft this third book, but so now I really I want to try and enjoy it as well, because the problem, but I'm going to use the word problem, is I drafted the second book in the middle of COVID, just as the pandemic kind of hit. It's around Marchish last year. But on top of that, you know, I had surgery. I had just been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. My grandmother died all in that period while we were on lockdown, and while I had, you know, about 6 weeks to write this book. And so it was a really, really, really challenging experience for me. And it meant that while it's now the book, like The Gilded Cage I'm talking about, while it's now the book that I am most proud of because I've worked so hard to get it where I was going to have to push through so much emotionally, mentally and physically. But because I just adore this series and this character so much, I really want to take the time to enjoy writing that final book. So, you know, I wrote the first book in 26 days, so it's entirely possible that I will write the third book in just a short amount of time, in which case, yes, it will be out faster. But we want to try and have it as balanced as possible. So we will see. We don't have a pub date yet for it yet, so it'll be, but that is next on my list, is to write that book, and then as soon as it's done, we will be announcing when it's coming out.
Well, you can't rush genius, and we've been spoiled. We've been spoiled by the short time between book 1 and book 2, so if we have to wait a while for book 3, I think everyone well understands.
It won't be a long while, I promise you that.
So I mean, I was about to wrap things up, but then you mentioned how all of the stuff that you went through when writing this book, and I was sitting there listening to you list everything that you dealt with in 2020, and knowing that all of this was happening in the lead up to, you mentioned this is your first book that's got simultaneous international release.
Yes.
So how much of a different experience is that, building up to the release of a book and knowing it's going to be out everywhere or in multiple countries?
It's really surreal, and I've just been blessed by the most amazing teams around me. My US team, who is, I guess, leading the charge, I guess you could say, and then Penguin Random House in Australia, who have just been the most beautiful people, and then new publishers to me, because prior to that I was with Pantera Press with my other publishers, and so it was all unknown territory stepping in with them, but they've just been so wonderful. And my UK publishers, which is Hodder, and they are just, they're just so lovely. And so it's just been to know I have such support, and this is, in something like, I don't know, 12 or 15 or 10, I can't remember the number, but in all these other foreign territories have picked it up as well. It's gone to auction in all these different countries, and it's being translated into all these incredible, editions and stuff. And so knowing that so many people are backing this book and want the best from me as the author, but also want the best for these characters in this world, it's, I just have to take moments where I stop and I sit back, and I'm like, I've worked really hard to get to this point, but I know a lot of authors who've worked really hard in their careers, and so much of it is about luck and about the market and about things that we don't have any control over. So yeah, I just have to stop and just be sit and have moments of gratitude and be like, oh, okay, I don't know how this happened, but this is just beautiful. So I'm terrified, and and I'm really, I sit on that seesaw of terror and excitement, and so I just I'm thankfully now at the point where I know that it is completely out of my hands. It's now down to the different territories and the marketing and the readers. It's mostly down to the readers, and so I just have to hope that it hits where hits the hearts of people, and but ultimately all I can do is write the book, and everything else out of my hands. So fingers crossed that that people enjoy it.
I feel very confident they will. To quote you from about 10 seconds ago, a seesaw of terror and excitement is pretty much an accurate description of my experience while reading Prison Healer.
I love that.
You're just really excited and then really scared and really excited and then really scared throughout.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really, really loved it. Very much looking forward to book 2. I could how much I love it, but people have probably gathered that by now. And we've taken up a lot of your time. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to us about Prison Healer.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been absolutely delightful to be here and talk to you about this.
And you also very kindly signed a lot of copies of this book for us. So thank you for that as well. We're really welcome. Excited to have them. At the time of recording this podcast, there are signed copies available. I expect they probably won't last very long. So if you're listening to this and you come on the website and they're gone, I'm sorry. But if
you snooze, you lose.
Yeah. But yeah, we appreciate it so much. And yeah, thank you. And podcast listeners, you can grab your copy of The Prison Healer. You can also pre-order book 2 in the series The Gilded Cage, and all of Lynette Noni's amazing backlist titles at your local bookstore or online at Booktopia. Thanks so much for listening, and never stop reading.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free, and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast, and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.